A king who faced immeasurable battles, a throne surrounded by intrigue and betrayal, a mother with a dark secret that threatened to destroy David's legacy. Abijah, the forgotten king of Judah, ruled for only 3 years, but his reign was marked by wars, conspiracies, and a revelation that forever altered the destiny of his lineage. An ancient manuscript warned that if the descendants of David strayed from the covenant with Yahweh, a curse would fall upon them. Abijah and his lineage would soon learn, in the harshest way possible, what this truly meant. The secret his mother guarded would reveal the imminent danger threatening his family. That secret, as would become clear, was deeply connected to the prophecy of the Messiah. Prepare yourself for a story filled with power, betrayal, and mystery. What you are about to hear will change your perspective on biblical history. If you want more content like this, subscribe and share the video. Let us allow more people to discover this fascinating story. Let us dive into it. The sun illuminated Jerusalem with its golden rays, touching the imposing walls of the royal palace. Inside, among the ancient stones of a chamber adorned with purple tapestries, the cry of a newborn interrupted the calm of the morning. Abijah, son of King Rehoboam and Queen Maacah, had just been born. The birth of a prince always carried great expectations, and the priests of the temple soon declared that he bore the blessed lineage of David, promising an eternal and unassailable throne. However, in the shadows of the palace, where idolatry spread like weeds, whispers began to circulate. It was said that Abijah was already marked by a curse, a burden of past betrayals and rebellions. His mother, Maacah, was no ordinary woman. Daughter of a foreign king, she had established herself at the court of Jerusalem with sharp intelligence and hypnotizing beauty. Her eyes, shining like sapphires, could both seduce and inspire fear, and she used this ability to control her son's destiny. He would not rule merely as a king, but under her terms, according to her own will. Within the palace, Abijah grew up amid luxury and power. Surrounded by golden tapestries and silver dishes, he lived in a world of comfort, but also of suspicion. From a young age, he learned that the palace corridors were not only for servants and counselors, but also for the invisible eyes of betrayal. Maacah, with her natural skill, ensured that her son was shaped in her image. She taught him that power was sustained not only by justice, but also by cunning, strength, and if necessary, blood. Abijah learned to be cautious, to measure every word, knowing that a promise made could become a condemnation. The kingdom of Judah, weakened after Solomon's death, was falling apart. Enemies arose on every side, and within the palace, instability increased. Disputes between priests and foreign mercenaries weakened loyalty, while devotion to Yahweh diminished in the face of the growing worship of Asherah and Baal, which spread through the homes of the aristocrats and even into the gardens of the palace itself. Queen Maacah favored idolatrous practices, and the priests faithful to Yahweh lived in constant danger. One of the few who still dared to challenge idolatry was Azariah, a man of unshakable faith, who saw in Abijah a spark of hope, even knowing that this light was surrounded by shadows. Amid so much corruption, Rehoboam seemed incapable of ruling firmly. The shadow of his father, Solomon, loomed over him, and his decisions were constantly challenged. Despite trying to regain the power lost after the division of the kingdom, his authority crumbled, and the gold of Egypt, which once filled Jerusalem's storehouses, was now in the hands of invaders who plundered the city during stealthy attacks, on nights when the moon painted the palace gardens silver. On one such night, an elderly man arrived in the city dressed in rags and covered in dust, leaning on a twisted wooden staff. His eyes, though sunken, conveyed a wisdom and suffering that seemed to carry centuries of experience. He went to the temple and asked to speak with King Rehoboam, who was already weary of hearing dark prophecies and refused his request. However, the old man was not seeking an audience with the king. His destiny was another. At dawn, when the first golden rays touched the palace towers, he was found in the royal courtyards. No one knew how he had managed to enter, as if he defied the sealed walls and gates. The old man, with his hoarse voice, approached the young prince and said, "You are the son of kings, but also of a shadow that threatens to devour you." Upon hearing these words, the prince, still an adolescent, frowned. He had already heard rumors of prophecies, but never had anyone been so direct. "What shadow is that?" he asked arrogantly, imitating the posture his mother had taught him. The old man looked deeply at him and replied, "Your mother is like a beautiful but dangerous knight. Her blood is intertwined with the destiny of forbidden idols. Her will is strong, but her ambition is a wound that can destroy the kingdom." The young prince felt a chill upon hearing these words. It was not the first time he had heard warnings about his mother's influence, but something in the old man's voice disturbed him. The man continued, "The lineage of David is eternal, but fragile if you fall. If you repeat the mistakes of your predecessors, you will be the last link in the chain before it breaks." For a moment, they stared at each other in silence. Finally, the old man turned and disappeared through the palace corridors, leaving behind the echo of his words. For the first time in his life, the young prince could not sleep. The sound of ram's horns echoed along the walls of Jerusalem, and a mantle of mourning covered the city. The aroma of incense filled the air as the priests chanted funeral hymns. Rehoboam, son of Solomon, king of Judah, had died after years of turbulent rule. His body, wrapped in fine linen and exotic perfumes, lay in the mausoleum of kings, beside ancestors and nobles. In the great courtyard of the temple, the kingdoms gathered to pay homage to the monarch. But what drew attention was not only the mourning, but the tension and ambition that spread throughout the crowd. The kingdom, weakened by wars and corruption, was now at the mercy of his son, Abijah. His mother, the queen, stood beside him, unperturbed, carefully observing those present, searching for allies and enemies. When the final hymn was sung, and the stone sealing Rehoboam's tomb was closed, she knew her life would change forever. She would inherit not only the crown, but a kingdom in flames. After Rehoboam's death, Abijah was crowned in the Temple of Jerusalem. The ceremony was solemn, but beneath the pomp and sacred rites, intrigue and the poison of corruption moved stealthily. The nobility of Judah was divided. Some saw Abijah as the legitimate heir of the house of David, while others questioned his ability to rule. Despite his lineage, his youth and impulsiveness caused concern. Azariah, the high priest of the temple and faithful follower of the law of Moses, was among the first to advise the new king. With a deep and measured voice, he said, "If you wish Judah to prosper, you must eradicate the idolatry that flourished during your father's reign." However, not everyone on the council shared this view. Some nobles, favored by Makkah, still wielded power, and the temples of Asherah and Baal had increased in number under her influence. Soon, Makkah realized that her throne was surrounded by enemies. Conspirators infiltrated the nobility, waiting for the right moment to overthrow him. Among them was Shepherd Tias, a noble who claimed descent from Solomon's former allies. He masked his ambition with words of loyalty, but in private he held secret meetings with emissaries of Jeroboam, king of the northern kingdom. The possibility of reunifying Israel under a monarch not from the house of David was beginning to gain strength, and murmurs of betrayal intensified as rumors spread of military movements in Israel. He had never accepted the defeat suffered in the battle against Rehoboam years earlier. Now, with the throne of Judah in the hands of an inexperienced young king, he saw an opportunity. The setting was perfect to launch a new offensive, with war looming over Judah like an imminent omen. The storm had begun to gather days before the conflict. The royal archives, which held a vast collection of scrolls and tablets, recorded the history of the kingdom. Since childhood, he had always felt a strange fascination with these ancient chronicles, for within them were hidden the secrets of the past and the decisions that shaped the destiny of Judah. Following his instinct, he ordered the scribes to bring him the oldest documents that mentioned his lineage. That was when he found something that sent chills down his spine, a manuscript that spoke of Solomon's alliances with neighboring peoples. Between the carefully written lines, it mentioned Solomon's marriage to a foreign princess, whose descendants had remained in the shadows until the days of Rehoboam. The text suggested that Maacah's mother was not entirely Israelite, but carried in her blood the heritage of the Moabites, a people known for worshipping pagan gods. If this were true, it meant that Maacah did not possess the Davidic purity she had always claimed. A shiver ran through him as he realized that if this truth came to light, his reign could be in danger. That night, he could not sleep. The echoes of the old man's words, spoken years earlier, resurfaced in his mind. Your mother is like a beautiful but dangerous night. If the documents about his lineage spread, calling his legitimacy as king into question, Judah could be dragged into civil war. Determined, he knew there was only one person he could trust to confront with this truth. He went to his mother's chambers and found her in her private room, lit by oil lamps. Her silhouette glowed with a soft golden light. With a firm voice, he said, "I found something in the royal archives, something about your lineage." Maacah, seated in a chair adorned with ancestral symbols, narrowed her eyes and gave a faint smile. "And what else did you discover?" she asked. "I discovered that your blood is not entirely Israelite," he replied. Maacah's smile did not fade, but her gaze sharpened. "And what does that matter?" she asked calmly. "Do you think kings rule only because of their lineage? No, they rule because they have the power to do so." The young king clenched his fists in irritation. "If the priests of the temple find out," he began, "they will do nothing unless you yourself tell them," Maacah interrupted. "And I doubt you want to see this kingdom plunged into chaos over a truth that changes nothing." The weight of his destiny fell upon him. Caught between loyalty to his mother and his duty as king, he heard the sentinels announcing the arrival of Jeroboam's armies. There was no more time for doubt. The war had begun. The sky was stained with threatening gray when the armies of Judah and Israel met in the hills of Ephraim. The sound of the morning breeze carried the echo of war trumpets and the neighing of horses. The air was heavy with the smell of iron, sweat, and fear as thousands of soldiers prepared for battle. ABIJAH, dressed in a white linen tunic and golden armor, observed the battlefield from the heights of Mount Zemaraim. The banners of Judah fluttered in the wind, displaying their emblem. On the other side of the valley, Jeroboam's army stretched like an ocean of spears and shields, a formidable enemy lying in wait. ABIJAH knew his army was smaller, but he trusted in something Jeroboam had forgotten, the fundamental covenant with the house of David. Breathing heavily, he stepped to the edge of the mountain, his eyes burning with determination. With his sword raised to the sky, he cried out, his voice echoing through the valley, "Hear me, Jeroboam, and all Israel. The God of Israel gave the kingdom to David and his descendants through an everlasting covenant." Untold. The soldiers of Judah raised their spears and applauded the proclamation, while the men of Israel grew restless. "You have followed a usurper," ABIJAH continued, pointing his sword toward the enemy camp. "Do not forget that he rebelled against Solomon, my grandfather, who was a servant, not a king. Now, with a great army, he believes he can overthrow the lineage of David." ABIJAH paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and said firmly, "You fight against something greater than me. You fight against the truth you abandoned, against the covenant you despised. If we face each other today, it will not be my army that fights, but the Most High." Murmurs spread among the soldiers of Israel. Some doubted, but Jeroboam, with his cunning, raised his hand and ordered his troops to hold their positions. "This is not King Solomon," he shouted contemptuously. "He has neither his grandfather's wisdom nor his father's strength. Today he will fall. On the last day of his reign, Jeroboam's men roared with fervor and advanced, ready to destroy Abijah and his army. The troops stationed on the heights had already devised their strategy, and the battle was about to begin. They would not face Judah's army head-on, but would surround its forces with a strategic formation. The surprise maneuver secretly sent a group of men into the nearby forest, positioning them behind the hill while the main forces advanced uphill. Suddenly, the hidden detachment emerged from the trees, falling upon Judah's soldiers from the rear. Chaos erupted in the camp, with Judah's troops trapped on all sides. From the front, Israel's forces advanced through the valley, while the ambushers attacked with brutality. Judah's ranks were decimated, the banners of the house of David fell to the ground, and the clash of swords mixed with cries of agony. For the first time in the battle, fear seized Judah's army, and the soldiers began to falter, surrounded by enemies on every side. Then he remembered the old man's words, spoken years earlier. "If you fall into the same errors as your predecessors, you will become the last link in the chain before it breaks." But he would not fall, not while faith stood beside him. With his heart pounding, he closed his eyes for a moment and raised his hands to the sky, pleading with all his soul, "O God of our fathers, you who made a covenant with David, show us your power, save your people, and reveal who the true king is." The cry of supplication spread throughout Judah's army, and the soldiers, inspired by their king's faith, raised their voices in unison. Then something unexpected happened. The sky, until then covered with grey clouds, was torn apart by a flash of light, and a deafening thunderclap echoed through the valley. A violent wind swept across the plain, making Israel's banners whip furiously, while the Israelite soldiers, terrified, hesitated. Judah's army, renewed and energized, reacted with unforeseen strength, catching Jeroboam's men by surprise. The trap that seemed to guarantee Israel's victory became its downfall. The wind blinded the Israelite archers, the horses reared, and the morale of Jeroboam's troops collapsed. Judah's forces, fire in their eyes, advanced relentlessly. Jeroboam's army began to retreat, and the battle that had seemed lost turned into a resounding victory for Judah. For Abijah, the battlefield was left covered with bodies and shattered shields. The defeated Israelites fled back to their cities. When the dust of battle settled and the dead were counted, Abijah withdrew to his tent. His body was exhausted, but his mind was in constant turmoil. He had won, yet something troubled him. That night, as he slept, Abijah was disturbed by a dream. He saw himself standing on Mount Zemaraim, but the valley was empty. An icy wind blew toward him, and in the distance, a shadow hovered over Jerusalem. The voice of the old man who had warned him in his youth echoed in the air. "You have won this battle, but your kingdom is still in danger. Not all betrayal is external, and not every victory is eternal. Stay alert, for the true struggle has not yet begun." Abijah awoke with a heavy heart. While his men celebrated the victory, an unease gnawed at him. He knew the message he had received was no mere illusion. Something greater still loomed over Judah. Though he had won the battle, he was not certain he had won the war. As the days passed, the celebrations began to fade. The rumors in the palace corridors quieted, but whispers of a mystery circulated. The village elders spoke of a woman who lived in the mountains, a woman from Jerusalem, known for her wisdom and for knowing the deepest secrets of the kingdom and its kings. At first, Abijah dismissed these stories as mere rumors, but when some of his officers assured him that she had foretold the fall of kings and changes of thrones, he felt drawn by an unsettling curiosity. Preparing in secret, Abijah put on a dark cloak and, accompanied by a small escort of trusted men, set out at nightfall. The winding road led them deeper into the hills, while the lights of Jerusalem faded in the distance. Only the moon lit their path, casting long shadows across the rocky ground. At last, they reached a cave hidden among the cliffs. A faint light flickered inside, and the air was thick with the scent of burning herbs. Abijah's men hesitated, but the king, guided by intuition, went alone into the cave. There, an elderly woman, wrapped in black garments and with a veil covering her face, stirred a bronze bowl in which sacred herbs were burning. Without turning around, she said, "I have been expecting you, son of Rehoboam." Abijah felt a chill run down his spine. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice trembling. The woman lifted her arm and with a deep, almost supernatural gaze replied, "Some call me the Lady. Others consider me a forgotten shadow of the night, but what I am does not matter. What matters is what you need to know, and it will change everything." Abijah crossed his arms, trying to keep his composure. "Why do you think I need to know this?" The woman gave a slight smile and pointed to the flames in the bowl. "You feel a weight in your heart because David's blood still runs in your veins, but it is not as pure as they made you believe." The silence grew heavy. "Explain yourself," the king commanded. The old woman leaned toward the flames and whispered words in an ancient language. The fire crackled louder, throwing shadows onto the cave walls. She continued, "David's lineage was blessed with an eternal covenant. Over time, ambition and idolatry corrupted Abijah's grandfather. Solomon, though a man of great wisdom, succumbed to the influence of foreign wives and surrendered to the worship of pagan gods. From that moment, the fracture in David's line was opened. When Rehoboam ascended the throne, the division in Judah deepened, not only politically, but spiritually. Idolatry had overtaken Jerusalem and its people. Abijah interrupted the old woman impatiently, asking, "What does this have to do with my destiny?" The woman, with a profound stare, answered, "It has everything to do with you, because the poison of idolatry is closer than you imagine. It is in your own house. It is in your blood." The king shuddered at those words. Maacah, his mother, daughter of a foreign lineage, she slowly nodded, confirming what he feared. "Bearer of a hidden heritage, your blood is not entirely Israelite. These are not David's gods. She, your mother, has woven a web in the shadows, spreading her influence over Judah." Those words fell heavily upon Abijah's soul. He had always known his mother held great power, but he had never questioned the extent of her influence. "If this is true, what must I do?" he asked, anguished. The woman, holding a small stick, drew a circle on the ground. "You have two paths. If you follow your mother's steps, Judah will fall, and your line will be forgotten. But if you purify your kingdom and stand firm in the covenant with God, the house of David will prevail." Abijah felt a knot in his throat. It was not an easy choice, and he knew the consequences would be profound. The woman looked at him with a piercing gaze and declared, "Then another will take your place." A shiver ran down Abijah's spine at those words. He left the cave, carrying the weight of an uncomfortable truth. On the way back, his thoughts tormented him. He knew he needed to act, but doing so meant confronting his own mother, the one who had the support of the nobles who held power in Jerusalem. As he passed through the palace gates, he found Maacah waiting for him. She stood in the great hall, dressed in a dark robe, her expression serene. "You have been away a long time," she said calmly, showing no emotion. Abijah took a deep breath and asked, with an ironic tone, "And what answers did you find?" Maacah kept her eyes fixed on him. "My son, choose wisely at this moment," she said with a tranquility that made him uneasy. Abijah understood that his mother knew exactly what he had discovered. There was no need to ask whether the Lady of the Night's words were true, for Maacah made no effort to deny them. The young king clenched his fists. The fate of his line was at stake, and he could only decide what he would do with this truth in the days to come. The tension in the palace was palpable. The shadows seemed to stretch longer than usual along the marble corridors, and Abijah felt his mother's eyes on him, weighing his every move. But Maacah was not the only observer. The temple and the most devout citizens recognized the influence of the Queen Mother. That same day, Azariah, the priest with a white beard and a piercing gaze, entered the palace for an audience with the king. Since the last years of Solomon's reign, Azariah had served in the temple and knew the vices that had weakened Judah. The sun was setting over Jerusalem when Azariah entered the palace's council chamber, where torches flickered with uncertain light. His posture was firm, without the usual deference others showed the monarch, but with the determination of someone unafraid to challenge power. "Your Majesty," he said in a grave voice, "I come in the name of God and of those who still remain faithful to Judah." Abijah nodded, signaling him to continue. Azariah went on, "The temples of Asherah and Baal have multiplied throughout the city. Impure sacrifices are taking place where worship of Yahweh once stood. And this happens under the protection of the Queen Mother." Maacah, hearing those words, knew they were true. "What do you want me to do?" she asked with an ironic tone. The priest looked at her sternly. "Idolatry must be eradicated. If you allow it to continue, your kingdom will disintegrate. The fundamental covenant with the house of David will weaken. It is not enough that you are king. You must be a righteous king." The young monarch leaned on the arm of his throne, feeling the weight of his decisions on his shoulders. "Doing this will trigger an internal war," she whispered without hesitation. "But it is better. War to purify Judah of the slow corruption that will lead us to ruin." Before he could respond, footsteps sounded. The door to the chamber opened, and Maacah entered with the elegance of a queen who never doubted her authority. Her eyes fixed on the high priest, carrying a mixture of disdain and warning. He knew decisions were being made without her presence. The king's mother said with a slight smile, though her tone was firm, "Hard days have not shaken my faith in Yahweh, who does not need the Queen Mother's permission." The words hung in the air like a challenge, but Maacah showed no anger. She knew the king's mother very well and understood that this meeting would have consequences. The consequences of the confrontation between Azariah and Maacah did not end there. The next day, priests and nobles of the court were summoned to discuss the situation of idolatry in the kingdom. The priests faithful to Yahweh in white garments stood opposite the nobles favored by foreign cults, many of them allies of Maacah. Abijah presided over the meeting, but the tension was unmistakable. Azariah was the first to speak, raising his voice with the conviction of one who spoke on behalf of Judah, the last bastion of the Davidic covenant, the stronghold of the God of Israel. He cried out, "With each day we allow idolatry to flourish. We drift further from Yah's blessing. The altars of Baal must be destroyed." Murmurs of discontent ran through the hall, and some nobles shifted uncomfortably. Finally, one of them stood. Kati, a man loyal to the Queen Mother, replied coldly, "What has already been destroyed cannot be destroyed again. The cults of Asherah and Baal have brought wealth and alliances with other nations. If we turn against them, we will lose more than we gain." Abijah clenched his fists. The truth was before his eyes. The kingdom was divided. Maacah, who until then had remained silent, finally spoke. "My son is king by right." Her calm voice rose. "Judah's destiny is divine, and the decision of which path to follow belongs only to him." All eyes turned to Abijah. It was his moment. The young monarch took a deep breath and looked at those present. "We grew up in Jerusalem," he said, "but we also grew up in power. We cannot destroy the kingdom with an impulsive purge, but we cannot forget." His answer was calculated, but the uncertainty in the air was evident. Even with his mother, he was not sure which path to take. The next day, tension in Jerusalem was palpable. The priests loyal to Yahweh whispered through the corridors of the temple, while Maacah's followers remained confident. But something disturbing happened. One of Azariah's closest priests, a man named Jedaiah, vanished without a trace. He was last seen walking through the streets of Jerusalem at nightfall, but by morning there was no sign of him. His house was intact, his scrolls and garments still in place, but Jedaiah had disappeared, as if he had never existed. The news reached Abijah like a punch to the stomach. "It's no coincidence," Azariah whispered, realizing that someone was silencing those who sought to purify Judah. The young monarch could not help but think about what that meant. That same night, Marka received an anonymous message, a small scroll delivered by a trembling servant containing only a few words. The priest did not leave. He was forced to disappear. You could be next. The king felt a chill. Everything suggested that something was being plotted within his own court. Someone was, in a dark way, guiding those who sought to restore faith in Yahweh. But who was behind it? Was Marka protecting it? Was it the influence of nobles who wanted to maintain their privileges, or worse? Was this only the beginning of something far more dangerous, something you had sealed inside the scroll? Abijah's scowl deepened. The battle against Jeroboam had only been the beginning. Now, the true war was unfolding within the palace itself. Nights in Jerusalem were becoming increasingly disturbing. The disappearance of the priest Jedaiah left an atmosphere of uncertainty that even the palace walls could not contain. Abijah felt that his kingdom was immersed in shadows deeper than he had ever imagined. One night, as the king walked through the corridors of his residence, he heard a murmur in the dimness. It was an elderly man, a servant with hands hardened by years of labor and eyes that carried the weight of unrevealed secrets. "She bears the weight of secrets never revealed, Your Majesty," the servant whispered with a trembling voice, pausing. "There are things you should know about the Queen Mother." "Speak at once," Abijah ordered, his heart racing. The old man looked around and, making sure no one else was listening, stepped closer. "I served in this palace before you were born, when your mother arrived from your grandfather's land. Many believed Marka was merely a foreign princess who came to strengthen the house of David, but there was more." Abijah frowned. "What are you implying?" The servant swallowed hard. "When I was younger, I heard rumors among the slaves and guards who were part of her retinue. They said Marka was not only of royal lineage, but had also been educated in the ancient Canaanite rites, sacrifices to Baal, Asherah, Molech. The name Molech struck Abijah's mind like a blow. Molech, the god to whom pagan peoples offered human sacrifices. The king felt his pulse quicken. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice barely audible. The old man continued, almost whispering. "In Jerusalem, in the darkness, some followed those rites, and your mother may have protected them." Abijah stepped back, as if the ground beneath his feet had become unstable. "That cannot be true," he murmured, shaking his head. But deep down, he knew it might be. The king could not rest that night. He locked himself in his chambers, replaying every memory, every sign he might have ignored. Could it be that his mother, the woman who had shaped his upbringing, had concealed something so sinister? He could not simply accuse her without proof. If he were wrong, he would lose all his authority. But there was a way to uncover the truth. With the help of two of his most loyal guards, he decided to investigate. For several nights, he moved secretly through the most remote quarters of Jerusalem, listening to merchants' rumors about hooded figures walking in the shadows, about candles lit in forbidden places, about children disappearing under unexplained circumstances. That was when he found the definitive proof. On one of the hills outside the city, near the Valley of Hinnom, where false gods had once been worshipped, he discovered the remains of a stone altar, blackened by fire. Around it lay fragments of bones and still recent ashes. The air was heavy with the smell of death. An uncontrollable rage rose within him. This was not merely idolatry, it was a crime. The young monarch returned to the palace with a storm in his chest. He could not ignore what he had seen. He could not allow it to continue. But if he chose to act, he needed to be certain that his mother was involved. That night, he faced his reflection in a polished bronze mirror. His face, hardened by war and the weight of the throne, revealed the tension of his soul. Could it be that Marka, his own mother, would allow such things? What hurt him most was the doubt. Part of him wanted to believe she was innocent, that she had merely allowed the worship of foreign gods for political reasons, unaware of how far the corruption had gone. But another part of him knew Marka never did anything without knowing every detail. At dawn, Abijah made his decision. He summoned his mother to his chambers, where the morning light cast long shadows on the walls. Makkah entered with her usual elegance, but her gaze was calculating. She knew something was about to happen. "Why have you called me, my son?" she asked calmly. Abijah stared at her intently. "Tell me the truth, Mother Makkah." She raised an eyebrow. For the first time in a long while, he saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Not fear, not guilt, but doubt. "Who told you this?" she asked, and as she spoke, the king felt his blood boil. His mother, with a subtle and almost sorrowful smile, replied, "Yes, my son, it is true. There are things a king must understand before judging." He felt the distance between himself and the next step, narrowing as never before. There was nothing more to explain about the innocent blood that was shed. The Queen Mother replied, slowly approaching and striking a poised stance. Placing a hand on her son's face, as if assessing him, she whispered, "I hope you are prepared for the consequences." With that, she turned and left, leaving Abijah alone with the echo of his own doubts. The king closed the chamber door, knowing that his next move could decide Judah's fate. Night fell over Jerusalem like a veil of shadows. He was still shaken by the last conversation with Makkah, weighed down by a suffocating uncertainty. Something dark hovered over his lineage, and if he did not uncover the full truth, his throne and his life would be at risk. That was when Azariah, the high priest, requested an urgent audience in the most secure chambers of the temple of Yahweh, far from the curious ears that haunted the palace. There, upon a cedar table, the old man unfolded a dust-covered manuscript, a scroll hidden among the oldest archives. It whispered of fate, written long ago by the prophets of Israel. It spoke of the destiny of the house of David. Abijah bowed his head and began to read the scroll, its words seeming as though burned by fire. "If the sons of David turn away from the covenant with Yahweh, their kingdom will shatter like a broken jar. The people will suffer, the land will dry up, and the blood of the innocent will cry out from the dust. The lineage of David would be destroyed. A king will be hunted down and fall before his time if he does not return to the ways of Yahweh," Azariah declared. Abijah's heart raced, and he struck his chest. "What did this mean?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. Azariah looked at him solemnly and continued, "The corruption of Judah not only endangers the kingdom, it also endangers your life, Your Majesty." The text contained an even more terrible warning. The curse of the house of David was intertwined with that of Jeroboam. When Jeroboam rebelled against the house of Solomon, a prophet warned him that if he turned away, his descendants would be wiped from the face of the earth. And now you, the rightful king of Judah, stand before a similar dilemma, Azariah said, sending a shiver through Abijah. If he allowed idolatry to continue, the curse would be fulfilled upon him as well. Fear pierced him, but then a disturbing thought arose. What if the warning was true? What if someone in his kingdom was seeking to hasten his downfall? The next morning, Abijah awoke with an inexplicable discomfort. His body felt heavy, his skin burned with fever, and an unexplainable chill wrapped around him, as if he were trapped in an invisible prison. When he tried to rise, his legs gave way and he fell to his knees. The palace physicians were summoned at once, but no one could determine the exact cause of his illness. There was no poison in his body. "It is blood, Your Majesty," one of the healers said with a worried look. Something was consuming him from within. Abijah felt a shiver of terror. Was the curse of the manuscript manifesting itself in his flesh, or worse, in someone else? That same night, the Queen Mother, Makkah, mysteriously disappeared from the palace. The guards claimed she had departed in secret, escorted by only a small group of people. None of her trusted servants knew where she was going, but some whispered that she had ventured beyond the walls of Jerusalem, into the hills where followers of the ancient cults, those Abijah had weakened, still existed. His duty compelled him to send a group of spies after her 2 nights later. When they returned, they were pale and breathless. The Queen Mother was in a forbidden sanctuary, Fever overtook Abijah, and he felt his body grow even weaker upon hearing this. "What did they see?" he asked. The chief spy swallowed hard and lowered his gaze as he reported, "She was in a cave where torches were burning. There were women dressed in black, hooded priests performing a ritual. I did not hear the words, but I saw their faces." The spy looked up, his voice trembling. She did not seem human at that moment. Abijah had time to process what his mother's visit meant. That very night, his life was in danger within the sanctuary. The attack occurred in his own chambers, at the moment when fever had weakened him and his senses were clouded. While he slept under a clouded sky, a hooded figure slipped through the darkness. With a gleaming dagger in hand, the assassin moved stealthily, but a mistake betrayed him. The creak of a loose floorboard startled Abijah awake just in time to see the blade descending toward his chest. With an instinct he did not understand, he rolled out of bed and the dagger plunged into the mattress. Cries echoed down the corridor as the guards rushed in. But the attacker, swift as a shadow, managed to escape through the room. One of the windows, however, left something behind in the haste. Trembling, Abijah picked up a torn piece of cloth from the assassin's cloak and hid it within his grasp. Embroidered in dark thread was a symbol, the same symbol he had seen on the profane altar in the hills of Abijah. He no longer pressed the cloth between his fingers. Doubts swirled as to whether the conspiracy against him was real and whether his mother was somehow involved. Deep within, the echo of betrayal still resounded in Abijah's mind. He saw the torn fabric of the assassin's cloak and the shadow of his mother in the forbidden sanctuary. The truth haunted him. He knew the danger had not passed. It had only begun. Then one of his captains burst into the throne room with unexpected news. "Your Majesty, we have captured a man trying to escape the palace. At night, a foreigner was carrying strange scrolls and Phoenician amulets." Abijah's eyes sharpened. "Bring him before me." Moments later, 2 guards dragged a chained man into the center of the chamber. His clothes were filthy, yet he still carried an air of elegance. His skin was darkened by the sun, his hair long and tangled, and his eyes, an unsettling green, reflected intelligence. "Who are you?" Abijah asked firmly. The man smiled despite his situation. "They call me, and I have served kings more powerful than you." The son of Judah felt anger pulse in his temples. "Why were you in my palace?" The Phoenician sighed and raised his hands. "I will not deny that I was sent to protect a secret, but now that I am chained, perhaps it would be convenient for me to reveal it." He leaned forward, narrowing his eyes, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Your mother guards secrets darker than you can imagine, and the greatest of them is you." Abijah felt as though he could not breathe. "What does that mean?" The sorcerer smiled. "It means that everything you believe about your lineage is a lie, long before you even had the chance to discover it." After processing those words, one of his bodyguards arrived with a disturbing discovery. "Your Majesty, we found this in the Queen Mother's chambers." The soldier dropped a sack on the floor, knelt and opened it. Abijah felt his blood run cold. Inside the sack were small idols of Baal and Asherah, engravings with Phoenician and Moabite inscriptions on clay tablets. They contained prayers to foreign gods and symbols identical to those seen on the hidden altar near Jerusalem. The proof was undeniable. Idolatry was not only present in the city, it had spread throughout the palace. Time passed, but the most painful question remained unanswered. How far would this go? Was his mother prepared to go that far to maintain her power? The palace was silent when he burst into his mother's chambers and found her seated beside an oil lamp, waiting for him as if she already knew. Her face remained serene, but her eyes gleamed with a dangerous light. "Why have you brought soldiers into my chambers, my son?" she asked softly. Abijah clenched his teeth and threw the idols at her feet. "Explain this to me, mother." She looked at the objects on the floor, showing neither surprise nor fear. "Am I not who I appear to be?" she said. "I have protected my lineage long before you were born." Abijah felt rage consume him. You have protected your lineage, but you have betrayed Yahweh's covenant. You allowed idolatry to poison Jerusalem. Makkah rose slowly, her linen tunic flowing with elegance. "And what has Yahweh's covenant done for you?" she whispered. "You fought Jeroboam, saw your kingdom descend into chaos, and now you are ill, without explanation. Did your God come to save you?" Her words were venom, but Abijah did not let them weaken him. "You caused this, and you will pay for it." Makkah looked at him with a mixture of pity and defiance. "Before you make a hasty decision, my son, I must tell you the truth." Abijah watched her closely. "What truth?" Makkah stepped forward and spoke the words that would change everything. "Jeroboam was not your true father." The king felt as if the ground opened beneath his feet. The air in the room became unbearable. "You lie," Abijah whispered, his voice trembling. Makkah shook her head. "Jeroboam was never a strong man, and I could not allow my lineage to weaken with him. When I knew I would be his wife, I sought another path." Abijah's eyes burned with disbelief and anger. "Then who was my father?" Makkah tilted her head. "A Moabite prince, a man who carried the blood of ancient kings, a lineage that does not submit. You carry his blood, and that is why you are strong." Abijah felt nauseated. All his life he had believed himself to be a pure descendant of David, but if what Makkah said was true, his right to the throne was in question. "If this is true," he murmured, his chest heaving, "then the entire covenant of Yahweh with my lineage is broken." Makkah looked at him coldly. "Yahweh's covenant will mean nothing if you do not have the power to uphold it." Abijah fell silent for a long moment, torn apart by the revelation. Then he remembered the manuscript in the temple. "If the sons of David turn away from the covenant with Yahweh, their lineage will be pursued, and a king will fall before his time." It was true, but there was still a choice. "This ends here," he declared with resolute voice. Makkah looked at him with curiosity. "And what will you do, my son?" "I will banish your influence from Judah. I will do what I should have done from the beginning." He turned to his guards. "Arrest the Queen Mother." Makkah's eyes widened in surprise for the first time. "You would dare challenge me?" Abijah looked at her without hesitation. "You challenged Yahweh." The soldiers stepped forward and surrounded her. Makkah did not scream or try to flee. She only looked at him with an enigmatic smile. "You do not yet understand, my son, but you will." As they led her away, Abijah felt a weight upon his chest. He had chosen his path, but had the curse upon his lineage already been set in motion? The rising sun cast a golden light over the walls of Jerusalem. The city was still steeped in uncertainty after the capture of the Queen Mother. The dawn felt heavy, as if the fate of the kingdom was about to be decided. Abijah resolved to go to the temple, wrapped in a royal mantle, the crown firmly set upon his brow. He ordered all the nobles, priests, and counselors to gather at the temple of Yahweh. It was the moment of truth. The great court of the temple was filled with murmurs. When the doors were thrown open, the most powerful men of Judah stood in rows, their tunics fluttering in the warm breeze. At the center, upon a carved stone platform, the young king waited, his expression hardened by the decision he had made. To his right stood the high priest Azariah, solemn and firm. To his left, palace guards escorted several prisoners. Among them was the woman who had been the most powerful figure in the court of Judah for years. Silence fell over the crowd as Abijah raised his hand. "Today we gather in this holy place," he said firmly, "to face the truth and to purify Judah of the corruption that consumed it." Some nobles exchanged uneasy glances. Others, loyal to the Queen Mother, showed deep concern. He took a deep breath before continuing. "We have found evidence, irrefutable proof of idolatry within the palace." The guards threw the idols of Baal and the objects found in the Queen Mother's chambers onto the ground. "We have found profane altars in Jerusalem and its surroundings. Among us we have seen how corruption has infiltrated our lives." Murmurs grew among those present. Some priests nodded, while others shifted uncomfortably. Then Abijah turned his gaze toward Makkah, "And the architect of all this was my own mother." The nobles held their breath, but Makkah showed neither fear nor surprise. Her face was a mask of calm, her dark eyes shining with unshakable pride. "You accuse me, my son?" she asked with a faint smile. "Are you accusing the woman who brought you here?" Abijah did not look away. "I accuse you of betraying Yahweh and putting the kingdom in danger." The weight of his words fell upon the crowd like a hammer. One by one, the scrolls bearing the names of the traitors were read aloud. Among them were nobles who had conspired with Makkah to maintain the worship of foreign gods, and corrupt priests who had allowed pagan temples to exist in Jerusalem. Some fell to their knees, begging for mercy. Others kept their heads held high, certain their fate was already sealed. Abijah finally pronounced the sentence that echoed through the entire temple: "The idols will be destroyed. Once the corrupt priests are removed, the nobles will be expelled from the temple. Those who betrayed Yahweh will be stripped of their lands." A commotion rose among the people, but the presence of armed guards kept order. Then the young king turned to his mother. "Because of your acts against the Lord and against Judah, you will be stripped of your title as Queen Mother. You will no longer have authority over this kingdom." A murmur of shock ran through the crowd. Never had a Queen Mother been publicly deposed. Makkah did not answer immediately. For the first time, the shadow of an emotion crossed her face. Not fear, but something like disappointment. "You have made your decision, my son," she whispered. Abijah held her gaze. Yes. The guards escorted her out of the temple. She would not be executed, but would live in exile, far from the power she had so fiercely desired. As he watched her leave, Abijah felt a weight on his chest. He had won the battle, but he did not know whether he had saved his soul. That very afternoon, the young monarch ordered a purge of all pagan temples in Judah. The priests, torches in hand, marched through the streets of Jerusalem, tearing down altars, burning figurines, and declaring the end of idolatry. Images of Baal and Asherah were reduced to ashes. Foreign temples were turned into rubble. Some citizens, still fearful of the old gods, watched in silence. Others, seeing the priests' fervor, began to join the outcry. For the first time in a long while, Jerusalem seemed to awaken from its lethargy. But then, something happened. Just as the last idol was destroyed, a sudden darkness covered the sky. The clouds, previously scattered, swirled overhead into a spiral that blotted out the sun. An icy wind swept through the city, making even the bravest men tremble. The priests stopped singing, and citizens clutched their garments. Abijah, standing before the temple, felt his skin prickle. Then a thunderous roar broke over Jerusalem, but it was no ordinary thunder. It was a voice, a deep rumble like the roar of an ancient storm, shaking the temple's foundations. The priests fell to their knees, and the nobles covered their faces. Only Abijah remained standing, staring at the sky with wide eyes. He did not understand the exact words, but his soul did. It was Yahweh. It was the confirmation of his decision, the sign that he had chosen the right path. When the storm passed and the light returned, the crowd fell silent. No one dared to speak. Then the high priest Azariah turned to the people and raised his arms. Yahweh's covenant with the house of David remains firm. The citizens erupted in cheers, and Abijah closed his eyes for a moment. He had restored the worship of Yahweh, eliminated corruption within his own family. Yet deep in his heart, a doubt remained. Am I truly free of the curse, or have I opened a new crack in my fate that I still cannot see? The echo of the purge of idols still rang through Jerusalem. The city had been cleansed of the corruption that had taken root in the temple and the court, but the shadow of conspiracy had not completely vanished. The nobles who had lost power with Makkah's fall would not accept defeat so easily. While the Queen Mother languished in forced exile, some of her most faithful allies began gathering in secret. One of them was Shephatiaz, a noble who defended idolatry in the temple. Along with several generals dissatisfied with the king's reforms, they conspired in the shadows. "Judah is weakened," murmured one noble, obsessed with eradicating foreign gods. Parkas nodded gravely. "Yahweh may give power, but he may also abandon us, something the king does not understand. Politics is not merely faith, it is power, and that is where the matter lies." Another conspirator spoke up. "Then it is time to act. His fate is sealed." Soon, the danger became evident. Spy reports reached Jerusalem, warning of an army of Moabite and Edomite mercenaries at the kingdom's borders. Deserters from Judah had been secretly recruited by the nobles. There were traitors in the ranks. The news was received with a mixture of fury and apprehension. "They will not rest until they see Judah on its knees," Abijah murmured, studying maps of invasion routes. The traitors had seized a fortress south of the region. Departing from Hebron, they would advance toward Jerusalem if they were not stopped in time. The holy city would fall into their hands. The king had no other choice. He would have to fight again. On the night before the battle, he was in Yahweh's temple. His body was still weak from illness, but his spirit remained unshaken. "Lord of hosts," he whispered, "if my lineage still has your favor, give me strength to protect what is mine." The next morning, Judah's banners were restored and raised high. The royal army, though smaller than the traitors' forces, marched out. With courage, thousands of men advanced southward, sunlight glinting off their swords and spears. When they reached the hills near Hebron, the enemy was already waiting. The mercenaries formed an imposing line, archers in the rear and spearmen in front. Moabite heavy cavalry prepared to charge. Abijah, dressed in golden armor and holding his sword aloft, walked among the ranks of his men. "This is the day Judah will prove its loyalty to Yahweh," he cried. "We are not fighting only for a throne, but for the will of the Most High." The soldiers roared with fervor. Then the battle began, a clash of steel and flesh that echoed through the hills. Arrows rained down. Across the field, horses reared and screamed as the fighting intensified. Amid the chaos of blood and dust, Abijah fought with the ferocity of a lion, cutting down enemies with his sword, surging through the opposing ranks as if destiny itself guided him. But the betrayal had not yet fully revealed itself in the midst of it all. In the heat of battle, one of his own officers sensed something strange. A commander named Nadab, who had served faithfully in his army, switched sides at the worst possible moment. Instead of reinforcing the defensive line, his men pulled back, allowing the enemy mercenaries to surge forward. They broke Judah's flank. The army was split. Abijah realized it too late. Before he could reorganize his troops, an enemy spear slipped through the defenses and struck him in the side. The pain was instant. The young king fell from his horse, his blood soaking the ground. Below him, Judah's soldiers, seeing him fall, panicked. Some tried to shield him, but chaos overtook the field. He was alone when the most loyal captains of the tribes organized a retreat. The men who managed to escape the battle pulled him from the battlefield and carried him back to the city. The journey was slow and painful. Blood continued to flow and every breath was agony. At last they passed through Jerusalem's gates. The people watched in horror. Temple priests ran to meet their king, but even they knew the wound was grave. Abijah was taken to his chambers, where physicians tried to stop the bleeding. With blurred vision, the king could see the sky through the window and wondered whether destiny had already been written, whether the curse would fall upon the house of David. The air pressed in around him, and he wondered if this would be his last dawn. Jerusalem was filled with the scent of incense, and silent prayers echoed within the palace. In the chamber, where dimness mingled with the flickering light of oil lamps, King Abijah lay there, his body weakened by the wound in his side. He could barely move. The physicians did everything possible, applying ointments and herbs to staunch the bleeding. But everyone knew the truth. The monarch was dying, surrounded by the most loyal members of his court. They waited in silence, heads bowed in respect. Priest Azariah stood beside him, holding a scroll of the Torah and murmuring passages of the law, his eyes, normally severe, now filled with sorrow. "The king must rest," whispered one of the priests. But Abijah, in a thin voice, shook his head. He knew there was no more time. And then, amid fever and pain, something happened. His vision blurred, and for an instant, he felt as though his soul had floated out of his body and out of the room. Everything around him vanished, and he sensed his spirit being called. He was being carried to a place he did not know, yet that somehow felt familiar. He stood on a hill, and before him stretched Jerusalem, but not as he had known it. The city shone with a golden light, and the majestic temple, restored, gleamed as never before. Then the image changed. He saw armies marching through the land of Judah. He saw fire and destruction and heard the cries of his villages. But then a new vision arose. A tall man with a stern expression, wearing the crown of Judah upon his head. He was familiar, though Abijah had not yet seen him in reality, and in his heart he knew what it meant. Yahweh was speaking to him, not in words, but in a deep knowledge etched into his soul. Your time is over, but your lineage will continue. Your son will reign after you and will do what is right before my eyes. He will completely destroy idolatry and restore my altar. Under his reign, Judah will know peace. Warm tears ran down his cheeks. He had not won completely, had not erased every shadow from his kingdom, but his son would. He had not been abandoned in the house of David. When he opened his eyes, the room took shape again. The faces of counselors and priests reappeared around him. They watched him with anguish, but he no longer felt fear. With effort, he raised himself. "Listen to my words," he said in a weak voice. "Judah is not yet free of its chains. Sin has been cut down, but the roots remain." The men bowed their heads, waiting for his final counsel. "Do not stray from Yahweh's path again," he whispered. "Do not let idolatry return. If we forget the covenant, the curse will fall upon us." He paused, breathing with difficulty, then turned his gaze to Asa, his son, who had been summoned to the palace when the king's condition worsened. Asa was young, but in his eyes one could already see the temperament of a ruler. "My son," he whispered to Asa, "you will lead the kingdom into the light." With tears in his eyes, Asa took his father's hand. "I will do what is right, father," he promised, and he felt a peace he had never known in all his life. The battle of his soul ended with one final sigh. The king closed his eyes, and his spirit departed. News of Abijah's death spread through Jerusalem like wind before a storm. The people dressed in mourning, and the entire palace fell silent. But amid the sorrow, a new hope arose. Asa was crowned king of Judah, and like his father had seen in his vision, he quickly took drastic measures to destroy the last pagan altars. Corrupt priests were removed and expelled, and the queen mother Makkah, who still had followers within the palace, was completely stripped of any influence. The people of Judah finally had a new beginning. Abijah had suffered under uncertainty and saw in Asa a strong leader, someone who would truly follow the path of Yahweh. And so a new chapter began in Judah's history, one that, for the first time in a long while, was filled with hope. The days of mourning in Jerusalem passed quickly, like leaves carried by the wind. The temple scribes, under the guidance of Yahweh's priests, began the task of recording the life and reign of Asa. The chronicles recounted Abijah's victory in battle against Jeroboam, his struggle for Yahweh's covenant, and his effort to purge idolatry from Jerusalem. However, they also spoke of his conflict with the queen mother Makkah and the weight of the blood that ran through his veins. Yet there was something different in the way his story was written. Unlike his father Rehoboam or his son Asa, he seemed like a king trapped in time, not fully understood. His bravery was not entirely forgotten, but the scribes did not emphasize it. They emphasized his reign. His time in power was brief. His reforms were important, but incomplete. He had fought idolatry, but shadows still remained. His legacy stayed uncertain, like a flame that burned intensely, but went out before it could fully illuminate Judah's darkness. Yet the destiny of his lineage did not end with him. When Asa ascended the throne, he did not repeat his father's mistakes. While Abijah tried to balance politics and faith, Asa left no room for doubt. The last traces of idolatry were eliminated. The sanctuaries of Baal and Asherah were torn down across Judah and demolished to their lowest foundations. The remaining false priests were banished or executed, and then came the most drastic decision. Maacah, the woman who had ruled from the shadows for so long, Abijah's mother and the architect of idolatry at court, was finally stripped of her possessions. The last vestige of her power was taken away. By Asa's order, the queen mother was banished. The chronicles did not record what happened to her afterward. Later, some said she fled to Moab, seeking refuge among the followers of her gods. Others said she died in exile, abandoned by those her gods had supposedly loved. She had manipulated many things before, but the truth is that her influence was gone. The kingdom of Judah, finally purified through the purge of idolatry, found a new direction under Asa. Asa reigned in peace for many years, but the question remained. The curse that had weighed on Abijah still lingered unresolved. The house of David had seemed to crumble. The prophets said that as long as Judah's kings remained faithful to Yahweh, his throne would be eternal. But if they turned away, they would suffer the same consequences as Israel. Judah survived Asa and the kings who came after him, but generations later, David's descendants fell into the very idolatry the Babylonians would later try to eradicate. They came, destroyed Jerusalem, and razed the temple. It seemed the promise made to David had been broken, but the prophets spoke of another destiny, that of a king who would come from David's line, someone who would not reign on a stone throne, but in the hearts of men. A descendant of Abijah and of all Judah's kings, the one who would restore the true glory of Israel, the one who would be called Messiah. And so, although Abijah's story was nearly erased, for centuries his lineage continued forward through time until, one day in the small town of Bethlehem, the supreme heir of the promise was born, the true king, the one who would never be forgotten. The wind swept over the hills of Judah, whispering names time had forgotten, among them that of a king whose reign was brief, but whose choices left their mark on the history of Israel and its people. Abijah, the monarch who fought idolatry and dared to confront his own mother, whose deeds faded into obscurity as the years passed. Years later, court scribes recorded his victory against Jeroboam and his faithfulness to Yahweh's covenant. But compared to his son Asa, his reign was seen as a bridge between Rehoboam's weakness and his successor's strength. The scrolls said little about him. There were no grand tales to exalt him. Without a legacy or songs to praise him, his story remained like a shadow between the pages of the sacred books, mentioned only in fragments relegated to the margins of the greater narrative of Judah's kings. Yet time does not erase what was meant to endure. Though his name faded over the years, Abijah's decisions were crucial to the story of his people. If he had not faced Jeroboam in battle, the kingdom of Judah would have been lost, fallen into Israel's hands, and David's line would have been weakened. And if he had not deposed Maacah, idolatry would have taken even deeper root in the court, and Asa would never have been able to complete the purge that secured Judah's stability for generations. Though marked by conflict and doubt, Abijah's actions ensured that Yahweh's promise to David would not be broken. Worn down, Abijah was a man caught between two worlds, between faith and politics, between duty and blood. His story was not as glorious as David's, nor as tragic as Zedekiah's, the last king of Judah before the Babylonian exile. Yet without him, Judah's history would have taken a different path, and without his lineage, the prophecy would not have been fulfilled. Centuries passed. Judah fell and rose many times. The temple was destroyed and rebuilt. Kings and priests were deposed and restored. But amid all the changes, one thing remained unchanged: Yahweh's promise to the house of David. From generation to generation, David's lineage continued. And in the days when Rome ruled the land of Israel, when David's descendants did not sit on a throne, but lived among the people as ordinary men, that promise resurfaced in Bethlehem. A child was born, a descendant of Abijah, a king without an army, without a palace, without a golden crown, who would not rule Judah by force of arms, but by the authority of eternity, the one who would fulfill the promise of a kingdom without end. And so, the echo of the forgotten king found its place in history, not as a man carved in stone, but as a link in the chain that led to the Messiah. Though time silenced his voice, his legacy never disappeared. And so ends the story of Abijah, a king whose name was nearly forgotten by history, but whose struggle was essential to preserve David's line and the covenant with Yahweh. His life was marked by the battle between faith and idolatry, between loyalty and betrayal, between power and destiny. Though his reign was brief and his legacy remained in the shadow of other kings, his lineage continued for centuries until the fulfillment of the greatest promise of all, the coming of the Messiah. If you enjoyed this story, do not forget to subscribe, comment, and share. This video aims to help more people learn about the dark secret behind Abijah's reign and its impact on biblical history. Leave your opinion in the comments and tell us what you thought. This story is similar to others we have explored. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. Until the next video, peace and blessings.